Coming in at number 10, we have Area 51 experiments. Now, what is actually going on at Area 51? We might never know. If you are a fan of this channel, then you have for sure heard of me talk about Bob Lazar and the gravity reactor, which was apparently an Area 51 experiment back in the 80s. But I have touched on that so many times that we will move on to something else in the realm of flight. Apparently, the CIA and the military have both been involved in testing and creating experimental spacecrafts. That is apparently where all the Roswell UFO and alien rumors came from. The CIA and the American military were testing new aircrafts in the area, and they didn't want people to know, so the CIA sent out disinformation agents to spread rumors about aliens. This way, if anyone saw anything, they would think it was some sort of alien ship, and they wouldn't give up any details about a new American gadget that was flying through the air.
Moving on, we have the spy kitties. This one is kind of funny, I can't lie. So in the late 60s, the CIA poured millions of dollars into one particular experiment. What was this experiment, you ask? Well, they wanted to see if cats could be trained to become spies. Yeah. They planned to train cats to spy on the Soviet Union, but it was a terrible fail. They called this Operation Acoustic Kitty. Basically, they implanted a microphone into a cat's ear and a radio transmitter in a cat's skull. Their plan was to then have the cat, lurk near foreign officials to pick up their private conversations. And they thought it would be perfect. But during their first test, the cat wandered into the street and was struck and killed by a car. So, yeah, they kind of gave up on that project and wasted millions of dollars with that plan.
Coming in at number 8, we have remote viewing. In the 1970s, the CIA got word that the Soviet Union was starting to look into psychic abilities. Not only this, but they were increasing the funding into this research over the years. This was alarming to the Americans because if the Soviets were starting to dump more and more money into this effort, it probably meant that they were about to have some sort of breakthrough. And there was no way that the Americans were going to be caught dead without psychic soldiers, especially if the commies over the pond were going to be making them. So they started to dump a ton of money into what would be later called remote viewing. It was seeing if someone had the ability to see objects in a room that they had never been in before, or if they could see events from far away with only the power of their mind. And truth be told, this program did see some success. The CIA learned that this is actually a skill that someone could train to an extent. The program was later canned, probably because it lacked any sort of accuracy that could be put into the field, or because it was successful and there was no way the American government wanted its people to know that psychics are real.
Making our way down the list to number 7, we have whooping cough. According to some reports, in 1955 the CIA was doing biological warfare testing on residents in the Tampa Bay area, without them knowing about it. They were apparently spraying whooping cough bacteria all over that area. They wanted to see the effects it would have and if it could be used in biological warfare. So they sacrificed the lives of their own citizens. Now, the CIA denies any such claims, but a lot of things don't add up. Florida state medical records revealed that whooping cough cases jumped 300% in 1 year. The amount of whooping cough cases in that area increased from 339 and 1 death to 1,080 cases with 12 deaths within the same year. Might I add that again? I don't think that's a coincidence. The CIA can deny it, but something undeniably fishy was happening back then.
Coming in at number 6, we have infrared vision. Making a super soldier has always been on the military's to-do list. There's been countless experiments attached to the CIA that have been trying to make Captain America a reality. And one time, they got pretty close. Well, not that close, but they almost made eyesight really good. It was back during World War II when the Americans wanted to have pilots and soldiers that could see infrared light. This is normally impossible for a person to see, but if they could change this, the game of combat would change forever. You would be like the Predator out there, slicing people up and taking their skulls and spinal columns as trophies. Well, turns out they actually had some success with this. The American government started feeding soldiers huge amounts of vitamin A, and in turn they started to get some progress in the field. Super soldiers seemed to be right around the corner, but then there were some massive advancements made in the field of infrared goggles, and any human experiments were kiboshed. Why wait for someone to become a superhuman when you can just make a robot that already knows knows how to be super.
We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Project Bluebird. Project Bluebird, later named Project Artichoke, was an experiment done to see if the CIA could gain control of individuals to get them to carry out deeds for them, like assassinations. The purpose of the experiment was outlined in a memo from January of 1952. It read, and I quote, "Can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against fundamental laws of nature?" This experiment involved the use of hypnosis, a forced addiction to morphine, and then forced withdrawals. They also used a bunch of psychoactive drugs like LSD, heroin, and PCP. They wanted to somehow cause the test subjects to develop amnesia and then, I guess, retrain their brain. As a part of the experiment, they dosed over 7,000 US military personnel with LSD without them even knowing. But years after the experiments were conducted on them, more than 1,000 of the test subjects suffered from illnesses like depression and epilepsy. Many of them also became suicidal.
Coming in at number 4, we have sleepless soldiers. Experiments with sleepless soldiers has been going on for quite some time. You can go all the way back to World War II when the troops marched continuously through Belgium to attack the French and caught them off guard because they made a 2-day trip in 12 hours. Back then they were all on meth. Hitler was on meth too. But now the drugs that soldiers use are much more accurate and have way less side effects. If you have ever heard of modafinil, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. This is basically the drug from the movie Limitless. It makes it so the user can stay awake for somewhere around 40 hours and it increases your cognitive function to levels that are unheard of. It's basically Ritalin, but 10 times stronger, and apparently there are no side effects. And when I hear that part, it kind of makes me think, well, you should sign me up because that sounds amazing. I could get so much work done, but at the same time, I do love sleeping, so I don't really want to give that up.
In our 3rd spot, we have Project MKOFTEN. This was a project run by the Department of Defense and the CIA. The goal of this project was to not only test the behavioral and toxicological effects of certain drugs on animals and humans, as they worded it, but to also explore the world of black magic. The CIA really wanted to see if they could harness the forces of darkness. I'm not lying, that's literally what they quoted in one of their documents. Harness the forces of darkness. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. So for this experiment, they brought in fortune tellers, palm readers, clairvoyants, psychics, witches, demonologists, mediums, just everyone with some connection to the other side. Even Satanists were recruited. But it remains a mystery as to what the experiments entailed, or what these individuals were used for. We just know that they were testing drugs on people, and I think it's probably to see if it would awaken some part of the brain and would allow them to connect to the spirit worlds. But I have no clue, that's just my theory.
And coming in at the number 2 spot, one of the most famous of all, we have MK Ultra. The government loves to try and find a way to control people's minds. I can't think of anything worse than the government being able to control people's thoughts. I mean, they are working on it with the amount of ads that are just flying at your face every 2 seconds, but with MK Ultra, they wanted to go a step further than just feeding you bright images about the new Big Mac. The MK Ultra program used LSD. Yeah, you know that drug that makes you trip out and acknowledge who you are, whether you like it or not? That was the backbone of the MK Ultra test. They would strap people down and hit them with a dose of then question the hell out of them. And I don't think that's a very good way to get someone to divulge secret information. I do think that's a great way to get someone to address their childhood traumas and become a better person. Now, one of the most famous pieces of this experiment was when the CIA agents posed as prostitutes and they would bring a John back to a room that the CIA had placed a bunch of surveillance equipment in. Then they would dose him with a bunch of LSD and just watch the dude freak out for a few hours.
And in our number 1 spot, we have the torture experiments. So as we all know by now, the CIA conducted tons of torture experiments on individuals. During the 21st century, medical professionals were collecting data on all the experiments the CIA was conducting on prison inmates. According to a 2010 report, the CIA was experimenting with waterboarding to see how effective it was. They would then adjust the procedure to see the results. For example, they found that adding saline to the water would prevent the subjects from slipping into a coma or from dying due to overingestion of the water. That's not all. They also did many sleep deprivation tests on prisoners, having them go without sleep for 48 hours, then 96 hours to 180 hours, basically just pushing them to their limits. But of course, the CIA denies any of this from ever happening, saying, and I quote, "The report is just wrong." Wow, okay, I believe you now. Glad you cleared that up. But honestly, Jay and I better be careful, because next thing you know, the CIA will be coming for us for exposing them.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Project 1794. This project was created with the goal to build a sort of saucer-type aircraft that would be designed to shoot down Soviet bombers. The program, which was created in the 1950s, was quite ambitious and had some pretty lofty goals. A team of engineers began trying to build a disc-shaped aircraft, but here's the real kicker. They wanted it to be capable of traveling at supersonic speeds at high altitudes. The documents about this project show that they wanted it to be able to travel at Mach 4, which is 4 times the speed of sound, and they wanted it to be able to reach an altitude of over 100,000 feet. At the time, the project was estimated to cost about $3 million, which is about $26 million in today's money. In the end, the project was cancelled in 1961 because the craft failed tests and proved to be aerodynamically unstable, which of course would provide a whole slew of problems at high speeds, especially supersonic ones.
Number 9. Passenger pigeons. The passenger pigeon once ruled the skies over Canada as recently as the 19th century. Billions of these bright orange birds would paint the skies, but only a few decades passed and passenger pigeons are gone. They're just no more. Now we have the pigeons that follow you onto the subway, you know? What happened, right? The very last passenger pigeon was Martha. She passed away in the Cincinnati Zoo back in 1914. So we took a look at her DNA to see if Martha held any secrets to her past, and lo and behold, they discovered Martha had a low genetic diversity for such a growing population. Natural selection and hunting eliminated arguably the coolest looking bird alive. Well, not alive anymore. The last one died in 1914, but in 2019, paleontologists found remains of the pigeon in protected indigenous lands in Canada in the Northwest Territories. They blended passenger pigeon DNA with archaeopteric dinosaur DNA. So that's science for you. We're bringing back pigeons with a hint of dinosaur. What could go wrong?
In our number 8 spot today, we have Dr. Zhivago. During the Cold War, the CIA began distributing the book Dr. Zhivago throughout the Soviet Union. You might be sitting there thinking that doesn't really sound like an issue of national security, and I thought the exact same thing when I started learning about this secret little project. As it turns out, there was actually a reason behind it. The book was written by the Russian writer Boris Pasternak, and it was banned by the Soviets. It is said that the ban was because the book portrayed an open-minded view of the Bolshevik Revolution, and because the protagonist of the book was individualistic. The CIA saw this as an opportunity to use the book as a tool, as propaganda, so they used some of their allies for help and began delivering copies of the books into the hands of those in the Soviet Union. There isn't a lot of information about what exact effects this had on the Soviet Union, if any, but it does give insight into how the smallest things were done during this time in history, just for one common goal. We often hear about the large missions with technological advancements and tons of money thrown into them, so it makes sense why this small one might often get overlooked. In our number 7 spot today, we have Project ICEWORM. This secret mission took place in the 1960s, and it was basically intended to build a series of mobile nuclear missile launch sites under the Greenland ice sheet, because this would then house medium-range missiles close enough that they would be able to strike targets within the Soviet Union. This project was called Project ICEWORM, but there was another project called Camp Century. Basically, Camp Century was to test out Project ICEWORM and see how likely it would be and how feasible it would be. So engineers went to work and created a network of underground tunnels and buildings that included places to stay, a kitchen, a hall for hanging out, there were supply rooms, and even a communication center and a nuclear power plant. This was all kept as a super secret for a long time and was even kept from the Danish government for 7 years. In 1966, however, the project was cancelled because of the shifting ice. This created unstable conditions for the underground tunnels that are most likely crushed now, but still remain beneath the Arctic. In our number 6 spot today, we have Project GRUDGE. No, this is not about the one I have against my ex-bestie. This project was short-lived and took place in 1949. The objective of this project was to study unidentified flying objects, or UFOs. Basically, because of research from before that stated that while some UFOs seemed to be actual aircrafts, there wasn't enough data recorded and facts known about them in order to determine where where they had come from. This is actually one project that had a lot of critics surrounding it, and apparently those critics felt like the project was only trying to debunk UFO reports, and I have to ask, even if that was true, why is that a bad thing? I'd like someone to give me a perfectly reasonable explanation for every UFO. I guess the issue really arose because people were feeling like no actual research was being put into the UFOs, and it was more about the objects being evaluated based on the idea that they don't exist, that they all had to be man-made here on Earth, and even beforehand the idea of extraterrestrials were ruled out. In our number 5 spot today we have Operation Gladio. This was a plan that was developed during the Cold War by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Basically, the plan was designed to keep Europe as safe as possible if there were to be a Soviet invasion. Basically, the plan was to form these kinds of secret armies in many NATO countries like Italy, Belgium, and France. These armies would be preparing for a potential takeover, and they would then lead the resistance if this were to occur. Some of the preparations for this plan, should it have to go forward, were things like spying, as well as hoarding ammunition, which is a frightening thought. This project was so secret that not only was the Soviet Union obviously kept out of the loop, but some of the highest ranking officials in the countries involved didn't even know about these little secret armies. In our number 4 spot today we have Operation WASHTUB. This operation came to light in 2014 when documents became declassified and more people could learn about this Cold War era operation. Basically, this was a covert mission that had its sights set on Alaska. The plan detailed the training of different people who lived in Alaska. We're talking just ordinary residents. They wanted to train these people to both code and decode and a few other different spying tactics, which would have been so cool. I mean, I would have wanted to be picked so badly. Not that I would have known it was even happening, but you get what I mean. Basically, the plan was put in place in case the Soviet Union was to invade Alaska. Then these unsuspecting ordinary citizens would use their newly learned espionage techniques to get all the intel they could and secretly relay the information to high-ranking US officials. As we now know, of course this invasion never occurred, so the contingency plan wasn't needed, but 89 lucky temporary agents were trained just for this purpose. In our number 3 spot today we have Acoustic Kitty. Apparently in 1976 the CIA was spending millions of dollars trying to make cats into spies. I don't know why they chose the one animal that does not care what you want it to do, but alas, they did, and Project Acoustic Kitty was born. The project basically involved implanting electronic spy equipment into real living cats who would then be trained to basically eavesdrop on unsuspecting people. This is another one of those Cold War era plans that was intended to be used on those in the Soviet Union. The project had a whole slew of issues, of course, however, because cats can get hungry and distracted, and unfortunately the first time this plan was being tested, there was a catastrophic outcome. The project was of course cancelled, and the researchers said that they believed they could train cats to move short distances, but that, quote, the environmental and security factors in using this technique in a real foreign situation forces us to conclude that for our intelligence purposes, it would not be practical. In our number 2 spot today we have the LUNIK kidnapping. Don't worry, LUNIK is not a person and instead is a Soviet lunar satellite that was kidnapped just for one night. This project honestly sounds like it was taken straight from a movie, and it has to do with the Great Space Race. In the early 1960s, the Soviet Union wanted to make it as clear as possible that they were winning the race to space, so they launched a multinational exhibition of their LUNIK satellites, which became the first spacecraft to impact the moon's surface, and when the Luna 3 returned, it brought with it the first ever pictures of the moon's far side. It was a big deal, and it's safe to say that the US wanted to know everything they could about it. Of course, the satellite was heavily guarded, but it was traveling from city to city for this exhibition, so undercover CIA agents went to work. Basically, they convinced the man who drove the transport truck to get some rest at a nearby hotel, and basically they would just look after it for him for a while he rested. I'm sure it was a bit more complicated than this, but you get the gist. From here, the agents then took apart and photographed every single component of the thing before putting it all back together, placing it back in the truck for its next tour date. There is no indication that before the operation became declassified that anyone outside of those involved knew what had happened, and I'm not gonna lie, that's a pretty hilarious plan, and the fact that it worked is both shocking and impressive. In our number 1 spot today we have Project Horizon. Even before people were going to space, we had big goals in mind for the world of space travel. In 1959 there were plans for a proposed manned military base that would be located, of course, on the moon. This plan, which was dubbed Project Horizon, would, quote, develop and protect potential United States interest on the moon, as said in now declassified documents. It was estimated at the time to cost about $6 billion, and the projected operational date was December of 1966, which is when they thought that they could have 12 soldiers on the base by. The project not only wanted to study more about the surface of the moon, but what better of a place to spy on the Earth than the moon? This project, of course, never came to fruition, and the reason it stopped progressing was because the president at the time, Dwight Eisenhower, rejected it at the same time that the responsibility for America's space program was being transferred over to NASA. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have the woolly mammoth. We would certainly be missing a very important animal on this list if we didn't include the woolly mammoth. These guys were of course a species of mammoth, and in fact they were one of the last in line of mammoth species. Because of the fact that in both Alaska and Siberia there were frozen carcasses discovered, they're actually one of the most well-studied extinct creatures. Exactly why or how they were driven to extinction is widely debated, and another thing people like to debate is whether or not we should try and bring them back. There was a genome project completed in 2015, and since then it has been proposed that the species could be revived through a few different means, but no one yet has taken the leap. Here's the thing though, there's a new company that is pretty set on de-extincting woolly mammoths, and they have a new investor. This investor is called In-Q-Tel, and they are registered as a non-profit venture capital firm that is funded by none other than the CIA. They claim that the interest in this company is less about mammoths and more about the capability to do such crazy projects. What do you guys think about reviving extinct animals? Are we on board? Are we terrified? Let us know down below in the comments. In our number 9 spot today we have Operation Crossroads. This operation is the name for all of the US nuclear bomb tests that took place at the Bikini Atoll in 1946. Following World War II, the threat of nuclear war was at the front of everyone's minds, which led people to want to test their nuclear powers, and the US president at the time, Harry Truman, ordered that the military continue to test nuclear weapons just in case they were needed in the future. Unfortunately, Bikini was the place that was chosen to be the testing site, since all planes and ships traveled on routes that weren't close to the area. This wasn't the most secret mission there's ever been, and the testing that took place on Bikini is now well known, but newly declassified documents shed a lot of light onto how the residents of Bikini were affected by these tests, and it also shows the objections that both scientists and military officials had before the tests were done, and the rationale that was used in the decision making when it came to go against all of those objections. In our number 8 spot today we have the western black rhinoceros. The western black rhino was a subspecies of the black rhinoceros, and they made their home in the savanna of sub-Saharan Africa. These guys were unfortunately the victims of poaching, which led to their rapid decline. Isn't that a bit ironic? People got so greedy trying to kill these incredible animals so that they could make money off of them, and now they can't make any money off of them because they killed them all. What a genius business plan. Anyways, this species first originated around 7 to 8 million years ago, and for most of the 1900s it was the highest population of rhino species. That all changed, however, as from 1970 to 1992 the population of black rhinos in general decreased by 96%. Other than poachers, another main culprit for the decline was farmers who killed the animals to protect their crops that were placed close to rhino territories. The last sighting of a western black rhinoceros was in 2006 in Cameroon's northern province, and sadly the subspecies was officially declared extinct in 2011.
Number 7. The great auk. Once thriving in colonies off North Atlantic coasts, the great auk would grow to 30 inches long, and its tiny wings would only be used to swim. Their wings were about 13 centimeters long, and they were so cute, and obviously, just looking at them, they were quite defenseless. I don't know if you could have picked up on that, you could probably take them. Very cute, very defenseless, you get it. Around the 1500s, European fishermen discovered this perfect area for hunting. And sadly, it just happened to be where most, if not all, great auks were living. Newfoundland looked like the iceberg and club penguin. It was kinda, dare I say, perfect. Unless you were of course a great auk. You were eating good if you were a fisherman, so the number rapidly declined, and by 1950 the last 2 known specimens ever were hunted by a single fisherman on LD Island, just off the coast of Iceland. Yeah, one dude just Thanos the bird population. Nice, what a monster, what a great brunch. Scientists now plan on using genetic information extracted from their fossils, or preserved organs, because some have organs in jars just hiding around. They plan on editing their DNA into the closest living species, which is now the razor-billed auk. The organization Revive and store is behind the wheel on this one. You'll see a few names come up over and over on this list, and yeah, not too many companies are trying to bring animals back from the dead.
In our number 6 spot today, we have the Morian viviparous tree snail. This was a species of air-breathing tropical land snails that were endemic to French Polynesia. This extinction was actually caused by a chain of events that happened after something humans did. The African land snail was introduced into Tahiti in 1967 as a food source, but it quickly escaped and began to destroy crops. Biologists wanted to attempt to control the African land snail, so they decided to introduce the rosy wolf snail to the area in 1977. Well, this went absolutely haywire, as the rosy wolf snail didn't just control the population of African land snails, but rather started to eradicate all of the snails that were native to the area, which of course includes our little friend, the Morian viviparous tree snail. So this one little introduction led to them becoming totally extinct in the wild. These snails do still exist in captivity, and there have been attempts to re-release them into the wild, but the rosy wolf snail continues to prey upon them, so at this point researchers are unsure if it will ever be possible for them to live in the wild again.
Number 5. Megatherium, aka giant ground sloths. How lovely and terrifying is this one? Sloths used to be a lot bigger than we think. Yeah, we often laugh at them for being so slow and funny looking. The movie Ice Age certainly didn't help their case. Now, of course, the giant ground sloth is closely related to our modern three-toed sloth. But luckily for us, today's aren't the same size as an elephant, because that would be a horror film. We wouldn't be alive anymore. I'd be sick to my stomach. If a giant elephant-sized sloth was in that movie, that would be not a family feature film. That is terrifying. That's Jurassic Park now. But we may be able to bring this one back, although they died off 8,000 years ago. DNA samples were extracted from their hairy remains, so the next step is to develop a fetus in an artificial womb. Yeah, that sounds easy, doesn't it? Let's just do that, sure. Let's 3D print it.
In our number 4 spot today, we have the Tasmanian tiger. These guys are actually less like tigers that we're used to, but they're actually marsupials. But not really like the marsupials we know today. These guys are a carnivorous marsupial that was native to Australia mainland and the islands of Tasmania and New Guinea. These guys had anatomy and adaptations that bared similarities to both tigers and wolves despite being unrelated. They were certainly an apex predator at their time, and as of now, their closest ancestors that are still surviving are the Tasmanian devil and the numat. Because of these living relatives, it is thought that scientists might be able to bring back these creatures by selecting certain parts of their DNA and sort of selectively breeding the species back into reality.
Number 3. The moa. This New Zealand bird went extinct about 600 years ago. The moa were these flightless birds, massive and terrifying, might I add, and archaeologists first discovered its fossil in a cave. Its flesh and everything was still attached. They had no idea what they were looking at for numerous years. And to be fair, yeah, it's haunting, it's terrifying. These ancient birds would reach about 5 feet tall, and when you think of dinosaurs, you probably think that's quite petite in comparison to, the scary ones. But the birds actually stopped flying right after dinosaurs went extinct because they didn't need to fly anymore. They didn't need to run for their lives. According to biologist Matthew Phillips from the Australian National University in Canberra, these birds were then safely able to roam the land after they didn't need to make these daring dino air escapes. It's beautiful. They just walked around, got fat, and would hang out in caves, then they eventually died off. Dare I say, the perfect demise. Phillips says this was an advantage when it came to birds and evolution, because wings, big or small, they do kill energy. So it might seem a little depressing to watch a creature lose the ability of flight, but well, it's because they're eating good, okay? Good problems. Scientists have found more moa DNA from ancient eggshells, so yeah, it's a possibility we may see these fatties soar the skies once again. They just gotta, shed a few bird pounds, that's all.
In our number 2 spot today, we have the woolly rhinoceros. We talked about another kind of rhino before, but now we have a woolly one. I didn't even really know that these ones used to exist. These guys were a species that was quite common in Europe and Asia during the Pleistocene, and they survived up until the end of the last glacial period. These guys were an animal that is seen depicted in cave paintings, and we have even discovered their bones and remains that were mummified and preserved in permafrost. These guys were stocky and they had a thick woolly coat which helped them survive in the cold tundra environment. In 2020, there was actually one of the best preserved remains of one of these animals ever found, which is a remarkable scientific discovery, but it has now prompted the questions about possibly reviving the species.
And finally, number 1. The smartest of them all, the biggest, baddest, The dodo bird. Dodo birds were once big and beautiful. They once filled islands all over the Indian Ocean. They had massive talons, they were gray and blue, they didn't have any natural predator, it was great. And then humans came along. Nice, way to go. Put that thumbs up for just f***ing up everything possibly around us. Around 1507, the island was discovered by Portuguese sailors, and yeah, the rest is history. We can probably figure out what happened there. It was delicious, dare I say. They were the easiest bird to hunt, hence the phrase, dead as a dodo. They're kind of stupid. They weren't just loved by sailors either. They were not 100% to blame here, okay? Monkeys, rats, pigs, any animal that made its way to these islands easily had their eggs for lunch, and they were pretty big. They were nice. Over easy. So it didn't take a long time for the dodo bird population to be completely wiped out, because, you know, yum. The last dodo was hunted in 1681, but could it be? Could we bring back the smartest dodo bird? Possibly. I don't really want this to happen. It'd be terrifying, but it might. Scientists found an extremely well-preserved dodo skeleton back in 2007, so we may have a chance at picking apart some DNA. A research facility near Melbourne, Australia is currently trying to use pigeon genes to bring this bird back as well. So yeah, I can't wait for dodo bird chicken wings. That's gonna be a nice combo. Number 4. Ooh, number 3. Definitely number 3.